Okay, this is a week 3. This is going to be the online assignment for this week, and we're going to be doing together the practice lab. The suggested structure for the practice lab is in your HT docs. You should have a labs folder and then a week 3 folder, and you're going to put the content of this in there. What I'd like to do for this week is a little different. What I'd like to do is we're going to download the files, needed files, go over the code, and then we're going to also be creating your very first MySQL database tonight and seeing if it works on your local host. So let's first talk about the app itself. It's a guestbook, creating a guestbook, and if you click on this example link here, it'll bring you to this page here, which is a guestbook. And I'll go ahead and enter in a first, last name, email. Okay, and it's added that record into the guestbook. I can now click on this record by clicking the edit link and go back and maybe do some editing to the contents, which you'll see a lot on websites. Updating, please wait. Update complete, please wait. And then it comes back to the same screen with that updated record. So with this guestbook, you can add a new record, you can edit an existing record. You cannot delete. So in order to do that, we will need some database connectivity. So what I'd like to do is make sure you have XAMPP running on your Mac or PC. Make sure Apache MySQL is running as always. And then we're going to first set up the database, username and database. And in order to do that, if you have the default install of XAMPP and you type in localhost in any web browser, it's going to bring you to this screen. And I would recommend keeping it at that. It does a redirect to this screen. And in order to get to our Web 290 folder, all we need to do is type in Web 290 and it will let us go there. Okay. So let's go ahead and go down at the left side here at the very bottom where it says PHP My Admin. You'll need to click on that. And anytime during the video here, as always, if you need to pause the video and complete the process we're working on, go ahead and do that and then come back. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the PHP My Admin. This is the administrator to create a MySQL database and host a MySQL database, and it also allows you to create users as well. On the left side over here is the existing databases in most default installations of XAMPP. Home button brings you to this area. SQL brings you to a SQL query page, which we will not go into this week, but it does allow you to write SQL queries, import SQL files, and look at SQL history on your machine. These tabs over here, let's go over these real quick. You've got databases tabs that shows you every database, just like over here. SQL query, the status of your database, how long it's been running, and since you just started it, it's not going to be that long. It does also have traffic, total traffic while you've been on your development. Variables, these are built-in variables for SQL Apache using PHP My Admin. These you do not have to change anything, it's just a visual. Char sets just shows all of the different characters available in SQL, all different languages. Again, you don't have to do anything there as well. Engines show all the built-in engines that MySQL comes with. This is just telling us what they are. Privileges we will go to in just a second, where we can create the new user or edit a user or delete a user. Processes shows the current process is running on your MySQL server. Export allows you to export databases to bring into another SQL database. And import allows you to import. For the nature of this week and this semester, actually, you'll be playing mostly in the Databases tab and also in the Privileges tab. And that's about it, those two tabs there. So click on the Privileges tab. Privileges tab gives you a list of all the current users. And the installation I'm looking at here that I'm working with you on is a pretty default installation. So your screen hopefully should be pretty close to this one. The root user of MySQL is the admin user, has all privileges, and that's actually what lets you log in to PHP My Admin. So first thing we need to do is create a user. We are going to use it in the application this week. So let's go ahead and click Add a New User. For your username here in the username field, I want you to put in first initial last name, your first initial last name. Where it says host, I want you to select local, and it should type in localhost there for you. Password, I want you to use the same as your username. So mine's cconkle, that's going to be my password here, and my password here. I got to retype it. Keep going. What you're going to do here is click here, create database with same name and grant all privileges. We're also going to click on where it says check all, which will basically give us privileges to not only have a database with all privileges, but also all privileges throughout MySQL now with this username you just created, mine's cconkle. So again, first initial last name, select local, password is the same as your username. Radio button, create database with same name and grant all privileges. And check all. Click on that. You know you've done everything correct if all these check boxes here are checked. All right? Once you've done that, make sure your screen looks like mine. You're going to go to the bottom right where it says Go. Go ahead and click on the Go button. It's going to create the user, the database, and the user with all privileges. If you get a prompt to remember the localhost password, I would exit out of that and not save that. So what it's doing here at the top is showing you what SQL just did, what MySQL just did. It created a user, cconkle, at localhost, identified by asterisk, meaning all databases now can be managed by cconkle. It grants all privileges on all. That's what this means here. To cconkle at localhost, identified by all, meaning every object can be granted now by cconkle, and also creating a database if not exist, cconkle, granting all privileges on cconkle to cconkle at localhost as a user. You'll also notice on the left side now you should have a new database, which is the name of your username. Go ahead and click on that database and notice how it brings this database now into focus, and it says over here on the right side structure, where you can begin creating tables, which we're not going to do, but we could manually create tables here immediately. If we click the home button, it brings us back to the all database view. But if you click on just your specific database, cconkle is mine, yours is your username, it shows you just the view for that database. Let's go to the Privileges tab. Notice in the Privileges tab for your database, it should have your name, your username, localhost, global, data specific type, all privileges on both global and data specific, and now you have all rights to do everything. Okay? If I click back on the home again, Go click on database just to show you the database we just created. So that's creating the database that we need with all security that we need. So now you have a username in MySQL. You also have a database in MySQL that's the same as your username. And that username has all rights. Now, let's go back to the Create Guestbook in the practice lab. In the Create Guestbook, I say here in the first line here, config.php file, place it in the root of your htdocs web290 labs folder. And when you download this, by clicking on it, it's going to prompt you to download this to a directory. And I want you to download it to this directory in your htdocs. Hopefully you already have a web290 and you already have a labs. So you're going to put it actually right into the root of the labs. So let's go ahead and open mine up here. Okay. And here's my config file. I'm going to right click and copy it. Do the same on yours. And now I'm going to go to my XAMPP installation, and you'll go to yours on your Mac or PC. On a Mac, XAMPP is located in the applications directory. On Windows, it's going to be located on your external USB drive. So there's my XAMPP folder. These folders here in XAMPP are shortcuts to this, what's in this folder. We can go ahead and double click on htdocs. It'll bring us right to our main folder. I'm going to have more folders in mine than you, but you should have a web290 inside of htdocs. Double click on that. You should have a labs folder inside of web290, and then you're going to paste that config file in the root of your labs folder. Okay, and then you're going to open that up in your editor in Notepad++ for Windows users and Text Wrangler for Mac users. So let me go ahead and open mine up. And what we're going to do here is talk about config file and PHP. What it is, it's this configuration file for connectivity purposes of MySQL database. You'll notice here it has quite a few variables and parameters. But what's great about a config.php file is it can be used in all of your applications in PHP. You just need to place it in a central location to where it can be accessed. And here we're placing it in the labs folder, but it could also be placed in the web290 folder as well. And we'll talk about pathing in your code using relative paths to figure out where it's located. So this is just a general PHP file. It's got your PHP opening tag, ending tag, DB host, DB name, username, password, DB connection, connection string, a comment line for connection, and then MySQL connect, which connects everything, database, username, and password, and then it selects the database. Okay, so let's go ahead and change what we need to change. On mine, my database name is cconkle. Yours is going to be your first initial last name. My username is the same, and my password is the same. So DB underscore name, username, and password is going to be all the same name, because I had you create in the PHP My Admin username, first initial last name, which also created the database first initial last name. So this connection file will be connecting to your MySQL database. It'll be logging in with your username and password. Username and password. It'll be connecting to your database. In my case, it's cconkle. All right, so make sure and save that. The other thing you'll want to do, if you haven't already done so, is the week 3 lab source file. When you download that and extract it on your computer, you want to make sure and put that as well in the week 3 folder for labs. Okay, and so let's go ahead and look at mine real quick. htdocs, web 290, labs, week 3, and there's the 4 files that should be in that zip file that you're downloading right here from the source line. Okay. Now, before we change, we changed anything, if you tried to run this at home, you would have gotten an error. In fact, let me show you. I'm going to put it back, this config file back to the way it was. In fact, I'll just change one thing to test. I'll change these all back to test like they were earlier. Now, if I was to browse out to week 3, folder in my local host, it's going to error out because it does not have the correct configuration file. So a few people have had questions on browsing out to your folder that you've created. All you have to remember is when you type in localhost in your browser and you have XAMPP running with Mysql and PHP running, Mysql and Apache running, when you go into the localhost and type in localhost, it automatically redirects to this XAMPP folder. Okay? The redirect occurs here in the index.php file. Let me show you that. You'll notice here in the index.php file, let me exit this out, that it's redirecting on these 3 lines actually. Okay, what it's doing here on this line is determining the server path. It's then doing a header location to the XAMPP folder and exiting out. So every time, that explains every time that you type in XAMPP or localhost in your URL, it redirects to XAMPP. Okay, now we could change that to anything else we wanted to redirect. If we wanted to redirect this to web 290, we could just type in web 290, save it. It might prompt you on a Mac to put your password in to give rights to that. Now watch, if I put in localhost now, it's going to redirect to web 290. You'll just need to remember, if you do that, to get to the XAMPP installation, you have to manually back and type in XAMPP manually. So it's whatever you want to do, whatever's easier for you. I'm going to put mine back to the path it was earlier, which was XAMPP. But that's how you read. That's what this file does. This index file does, is redirect. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Good. Now if I do a localhost again, now it's redirecting back to XAMPP like it should. Okay. So when you type in when you type in localhost, it's going to redirect to XAMPP because of this index file I just showed you. Okay. Now if I go ahead and back and type in web 290, it's going to give me my website, web 290, because you'll notice in the root of my web 290 is my index.php. Index.php is the home page that you're seeing here. Okay? Exit out of those two. So I just wanted to clarify paths and where things are at and where you type them in when you're in localhost. When you type in localhost, you're literally in the root of htdocs. The only reason it redirects to XAMPP is because of what I just showed you in the index.php file. Okay? So let's go ahead and go on. Let's go to the week 3 lab. I'm going to type in labs. Notice when I type in labs, it's bringing me to my labs directory. just like if I was to go in it this way. It's the same directory, but in a web view. Okay, it's in a web view. This labs here is the same. But it's nice to keep this available. It's called browse mode in PHP because you can click on the corresponding folders you want to go to see and run that code. So now remember, we did change back the config.php file to the original test. Now we're going to go and click on this to see what happens. Notice it says 2 warnings: MySQL connection, access is denied for user test at localhost on both lines, because that user does not exist. If we go back to our Php My Admin, you'll notice the user test does not exist. cconcle does, root, and root does, and in yours it'll be your first initial last name and root, but the test user does not exist. So in order to fix that, all we need to do is go back to our text editor here and put in the correct variables. Save. Now we don't get an error. There's no data in here yet. Okay, but there is no error. We've not created anything yet, so once you go ahead and type in your first initial last name, or your first name, last name, and then an email address, it doesn't have to be Rock Valley College, and click Add Contact. It'll immediately add it, but I also want to show you in the XAMPP view for Php My Admin what it looks like there. If you go back to your Php My Admin, click on your database, you'll notice now it has a people database, and in this area here where it says actions, there's a button here for browsing. If you click on that, it'll bring you the records in that table. So the table's called people it created, and it has one record, the one I just created, people ID 1, people underscore F name Chuck, people underscore L name Conkle, people underscore email cconkle@gmail.com. So it created it correctly. Now for me to edit this, I'm going to click the edit button, and I'm going to change the email. Maybe I updated it there. I want to make sure it's there. It goes to the update complete. Please wait. Redirects back and makes that modification. If I go back to the Php My Admin, I can click on this table again and see a refresh of that change. Okay, so now that we've done that and everything's working properly on the actual application, the Guestbook application, now let's look at the code. If you do need to stop this video and go back and get everything working, go ahead and do that, but we're going to continue on with the code. We're going to start with the config file we've already talked about, and again, this config file can be used in multiple applications. But the first file is the index file. That's the one the user sees here when they load my Guestbook. It's just a simple form at the top, HTML form, right up here. But notice in the line 7, it has an action, equals contact.php method equals post. What that means is it's sending the contents of this form to the contact.php file. Each one of these fields has a line to it, a name, and that's the variable it's going to bring over, you'll see in a second, into the contact form, contact file here. So I've got first name, which is F name, L name, email, and then on the button add contact, it's an input type submit, so that's going to submit it, and the values add contact, just what shows here on the button. So the first 3 are text fields, which users can type in, and again, it's just normal HTML. The only thing different than you probably used before is the action equals, which sends it to another page. Now, on line 26 is where the PHP code begins. Let's go over that. So we're going to include, right after the PHP declaration, that it's a PHP section here. Notice it includes /config.php. This is a relative path to one directory back. It should find a config.php file. Because remember, we placed it in the root of the lab folder, or labs folder. And so we are currently in week 3 of the labs folder. So here's week 3. That's the index file we're looking at right now. We go back one directory, which // and there's the config.php file. If we were to put the config.php file in the Web 290, we would have to do one more set of // So each one of these // means one directory structure back. Okay. Line 28 is a comment. It says sees if people database exists. If it doesn't, it creates it. Line 29 has a check variable equals MySQL. Select all from people and limit 0, 1. And this is going to basically select the very first record in people and check to see if it exists. If check, meaning query was legal and table existed, meaning they found one record in the people query. If it wasn't, meaning it didn't exist, then something went wrong. It's going to create the table. So here's a variable for that. Plug in this SQL string into this variable, create table people, people_ID. It's an integer with 11 spaces in that field, not null, auto increment, meaning it cannot be null, and it's an auto increment field that when that record's created, it'll automatically give it the first record should be value 1, second record 2, so on and so forth. This record here that was created, if you remember when we looked in the Apache Php My Admin and clicked on people, notice they gave people ID of 1. Next is fname, people_fname, people_lname, and people_email are all varchar type fields, which is string fields with 32 characters available in those strings. These also cannot be null. They have to be populated with data. The primary key is people ID. That one does not have to be typed in by the user in a form because it's an auto increment. And auto increments, and you'll notice there's no ID field here, auto increments are automatically created upon creation of that table. This line here, results equals MySQL_query peoples. All it's doing here is running that query. If an error was to occur, it would throw the error and tell you what the error is. Okay? An example, if I was to type in Tim and nothing else in last name or email and click add contact, notice it goes ahead and adds that record. Does not give me an error. Okay? In fact, you can do this all day because of the error connection that we made in just a second we'll talk about. But if the database name was wrong, if the username password was wrong in the config.php file, then you would definitely get a connection error. Okay? Now let's go back into the next line where it's going to query all the people from the table. And so after it creates a query. All right. And the query is just going to, again, select all the records in the database, and it's going to show it on this form here below the add contact button. So here's a query. Select all from people. It's going to put it in the MySQL query and put it in the variable called result. Then close the MySQL database connection because we're through with it. All right, then it's going to take and it's going to echo out the first part of the table, which is basically just first name, last name, email, edit, which is going to be the header part up here at the top. Then it begins to add in the second row, third row, so on and so forth, until there's no more rows to get. It does that with a while statement. Here's a while statement that's used. This will continually loop, okay, while data is available, okay? And what it's going to do that is going to do what's called a Mysql fetch array result. And what that does is it loops each time until it's done, record by record. So here it uses an echo command, populating the table. This is basic HTML for tables structure, TRs for row, TD for columns. And you'll notice here it expands a row for people name, or column for people name, column for L name, and column for people email. So it's going to keep looping that until the database is empty, until it's done. Then it's going to add at the last column an edit link. So the first row here is the first name. Second row is last name, or second column, sorry, it's last name. First column, first name, second column, last name. Third column, email. And the final column's edit with a hyperlink. And notice on the hyperlink it puts in here, it's referencing edit.php, and it's doing a variable reference, ID equals. We did this actually in week 2, the variable reference to the URL. It's referencing ID equals, and then whatever the people ID is, which is the primary key remember of the database, will be the link when they click on it. So if I highlight my database here, my Guestbook, you'll notice at the bottom of my web browser, as I'm hovering over each one of these edit buttons, it's giving me the ID equals whatever number that record is for that index. So I've got 1 here, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if I look at my PHP My Admin, I now have 5 records as well. Okay, people ID 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so that's what that page does. It does all of that to load what you see here on this page. All right. Now the only way currently to delete these records here, if I wanted to delete these, would be to go into PHP My Admin, and you can actually click on these line by line, the X, and it will delete these within the actual PHP My Admin interface. All right. And if we go back here to the table, load this page again, notice it only shows 1 now. All right. So let's go back to the code. That was the index we just covered. Okay, now when they hit submit, or hit the add contact button and submit this information up here, before it adds it here, it goes to the contact.php file. The contact.php file, again, references at the top the config file for database connection, and all this file is actually doing is an update query to the MySQL. Here is the update. Upon first instance, here when they click the button, notice it says insert into people, people underscore fname, people underscore lname, people underscore email, all separated by comma. Values of this are fname, and this whole line right here that I'm highlighting from dot to dot is the fname that is part of the actual table from the post on index. Now this post command, $_post, what this is doing is it's looking for in that post file, which is this file right here, notice it's a method equals post, it's looking for a variable, and we're giving it a variable here called fname. And that's actually the first name variable. Then you have lname, then you should have email. Sure enough, here's our fname, lname, and email. Now you might wonder what the dot is for. That is encapsulate a string. To bring in a string from a database, you need to put a dot before both. And then not only that, you'll notice here, it has a single quote here and a single quote here, right? These fields, remember, were all string fields in MySQL, and all string fields have to have single quotes around the string value. Otherwise, it would error out when it went to insert these fields into the record. So that's the insert into update. It's going to take that and run it here with a MySQL query. If it fails, it'll error out and tell you what it is. And generally, it's going to be if there was a syntax issue here, or one of these values did not have data, or maybe database connection as well could be an issue. Now, one of the things it's bringing over here is after it results, it's going to also do what's called a location index.php. What this is doing is basically going to redirect back to the index after it's finished. So that's why after you go here and type in a name, it goes to the update we just looked at. It goes to the contact.php. So we're here right now. They hit the contact button right here. It goes to the contact.php. It stays on this form. Okay, it doesn't move from this form. It stays there, so it's pretty quick. And basically just stays right there with that information. So you don't see it going to this page and coming back. It's immediate result with this line, header location index.php. Okay. Now let's go back to the index. What if they wanted to edit? They click on these edit links. If they click on the edit links, if we go down to that code here, it's actually going to the edit.php, question mark, ID equals, and whatever people ID that they're on. In this one, we've got people ID 1 and people ID 6. The reason it's 6 is, remember, we deleted some, and in MySQL, it's going to keep a count of the last written data for that auto increment, and the last written data before this one, even though this was deleted, was 5. So that's why it has 6 as a value. Okay. There is a way, by the way, to reset that count, but we're not going to get into that right now. But it does add 1 to the last one that was added, which was 5. So now this one's 6. And if I click on this edit, it brings me to the edit.php question mark ID equals 6, and it knows it's that record. So let's go there. Include to the config file again. Comment is going to get ID from the index. So here we're actually using a get command to get the ID. And we're not using a post, but we're using a get command because this is not a post link, it's a get link. Anytime you do a reference within a browser, remember the question mark, whatever name you want to call it, equals, this is actually a get command. You're going to have to use a get command for that. So it's using the get function, PHP get function, ID. It's looking for the value for ID, and it's going to plug it in ID. In this case, it's going to be 6. SQL command is going to ask the database for information about the links table. And here is a select all from people, where people ID is equal to ID. In this case, it's going to be 6. Then it's going to plug it in that MySQL query. It's going to run here, plug it into the result variable, do another MySQL_fetch array like we did in the index to expand it for the table. It's going to plug that into a num variable. We're going to end the PHP for this top part, and then we're going to populate here an edit for first name, last name, and email with a form. And so in this form, the form action is going to go to update.php, the method's post. It does have a hidden file in this one called ID, which is this field right here. This is the main part of the main primary field of the record. And it's going to echo out people ID, but this is not going to be seen because it's a hidden type field. First name is going to echo out the first name, people__f name from the database, and then L name, and then finally email. So echo, and then this num, remember, is the variable that was used up here to get all the records in that MySQL fetch array. It's an array of 0, 1, and 2 because we know there's 3 records in here, or 3 columns in here. 3 different fields are coming in through that array, so it's going to expand it out. And then finally a submit button. Once I hit the submit button, it's going to go to the update.php file. So let's go ahead and change this to something. We'll put fields. We hit submit. We see an update complete. Please wait. And then it goes back to the index.php. So now let's lastly look at the update.php file. What it's going to do is, again, bring in the database connection file, config.php. It has 4 posts from the edit.php form here, and it's going to be looking for, or it's going to be bringing over people ID, people_f name, L name, first name, last name, and email. So there's the ID. Remember, it was a hidden field in the edit.php file. F name, L name, and email. Then we're going to do an update query. Update people, set people_f name is going to be equal to f name in single quotes because it's a string. People_L name equals L name in single quotes. And do remember, anytime you use variables that you've declared, you remember to bring in not only the $ symbol, but the same syntax it was declared as. So we have f name, L name, and then finally people_email equals email. And again, all these are in single quotes because they're strings, string field types, where people ID is equal ID. So it's going to update these records, f name, or these fields, f name, L name, and email, where the people ID is equal to 6 in this case. Here it's going to fire the query, MySQL_query SQL. It's going to plug it in result. Then it's going to do what's another header, but this is different than what we looked at earlier. The header one in the contact. Notice it just is location index.php. That's immediate. This one allows you to wait a little bit. That's why you see it wait a little bit on the screen. It's going to do what's called a refresh, single quote refresh, :4. That's supposed to be 4 seconds. Semicolon URL equals index.php single quote. So this is the time. If we wanted to make it longer, we would make it longer. And while it's waiting, that's where you see on the screen the echo command, update complete, please wait. So I've upped the time a little bit. Let's see if the time is updated when we do an edit again. I'll get rid of the S again. Click submit. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go. So it did work. And so this is always a nice trick whenever you're wanting to have the user wait while the database is, by the time it gets to this line, just so you know, the database is already updated, but it looks good aesthetically to have it echo this update complete. Also, it's good to put this in here to save stress on the MySQL database as well. So what we've went over tonight is, first of all, the config.php file. And this is not going to work until you've created, like we did at first tonight, the username in the database and also a database name. We created a username and privileges, gave it all rights and all privileges. Then we went into the config.php file, which we saved in the root of the labs folder, modified the DB name, username, and password. And remember, the config.php file, this can be used in multiple applications within your labs directory. In the actual files that use a config.php file for database connectivity, because that's what it's for, we're doing a relative path. You don't want to do an absolute path, because if you move this to another computer or to another installation somewhere, by using relative paths, it's always going to work. And then this index file initially checks to see if the people database is created. If the people database is not created, which it is now because we've been running it, but if the people database is not created, it creates it with all the fields and the index, which in this case is people ID. Once it creates that table, it goes ahead and fills in the form, needed form for that first field for that website, and we'll say that the database is created, there is records. What it does on this very first line here, very first line from 30 to 43, is if it does exist, it's going to go to this path here and come all the way down here, which is going to query that table, and then it's going to populate the below table with those records. Just like we did see here. So as soon as this page loads and you go to week 3, it populates this with the records. If the user was to click on the edit button, or the edit link on the 4th column here, it's going to go to the contact. The contact brings in all of the values from the last form, from this page here, first name, L name, and email, creates a new record in people database, in the people table, and then does an immediate redirect to location. That's why you see the page stay as is. Then, if they do click on the edit button brings them to this page, and this page actually gets the ID, populates the ID, so it can have the contents of that ID record, which in this case is Chuck Conkle and my email. Once I change the value in this edit.php file or values and hit submit, it's going to redirect back to update.php as a post command. And so let's go and do that. Then I get the update complete, please wait. If I go to the update.php file, it's actually bringing in the ID, fname, lname, and email from my edit file. It's updating the database and the record in that database. And then here on the header file line, it's basically refreshing after 10 seconds and redirecting to index.php. Now, just to show you that this can be any URL. It's an internal URL now, but it could be redirected to any site. Does not have to be a local site on your environment. So if I was to type in another site like google.com or something and save it, and go ahead and click the edit, hit submit, wait the 10 seconds, and then it should be redirecting here to google.com right now. But for our purpose, that doesn't make sense to do that. But I just want to show you can put anything in there, not just a local URL to your environment, which this one is index.php. You could also put an external thank you somewhere else. Okay. So once you're finished with this in-class exercise, all I need you to do for me is in Eagle. Let's go there real quick. What I'd like you to do in Eagle is, there is no submission actually for the in-class each week, but I do want you to do this week. I'm going to go ahead and put in here in week 3. All I need you to do is at the bottom here, I'll make mention of it and make an edit here real quick. At the bottom of the in-class lab, to just email me in Eagle that you successfully completed the in-class lab here. But you do not have to submit the files or upload the files.